Ambassador Kalen of the Lorian species, a respected diplomat in the Galactic Concord, was renowned for his logic and prudence. He was preparing for a council session regarding the growing threat from the Grey Swarm, ancient automated warships that were reactivating and attacking peripheral regions. Humans have been accepted into the Concord in scientific, logistical, and artistic roles, but were absolutely forbidden from joining the Concord Defense Force, CDF, due to their history of internal conflicts and a nature considered volatile and emotional. Kalen believed this ban was entirely reasonable to protect galactic stability. The Earth delegation, led by pragmatic scientist Dr. Eris Thorne and quiet military strategist Commander Eva Rostova, formally resubmitted a petition to join the CDF. They argued that the CDF's traditional tactics were proving ineffective against the Grey Swarm, and humanity's adaptability and unique thinking were necessary. Kalen led strong opposition in the council. He presented data on human wars and psychological analyses showing the danger of giving advanced weapons to a species lacking emotional control. He emphasized that human unpredictability was a danger, not an asset. Other species in the galactic elite supported Kalen, fearing the chaos humans might bring. Thorne and Rostova calmly faced the criticism, presenting arguments about the necessity of changing mindsets in the face of new threats. Tension permeated the council. The debates continued. Kalen used logic and historical evidence to refute human proposals. Thorne responded with complex simulations showing human problem-solving algorithms excelled in the chaotic, non-linear situations the Grey Swarm created. Rostova continued to observe, take notes, rarely speaking but with keen eyes. A critical scientific research station of the Concord, near the Grey Swarm's operational area, suddenly went silent. A rescue mission commanded by an experienced Lorian captain, trusted by Kalen, was swiftly deployed. The rescue mission failed disastrously. The CDF ship was ambushed by the Grey Swarm's non-biological tactics, adapting quickly in ways traditional military logic couldn't anticipate. The Lorian captain was forced to retreat with heavy losses. This event shocked the council, revealing the inadequacy of current methods. In this crisis, the Earth delegation proposed a daring rescue and local neutralization plan. Using a small modified human transport with experimental stealth technology and improvised EMP weapons to infiltrate the local command signal center of the Grey Swarm. The plan was ridiculed by Kalen and many others as reckless, suicidal, and violating basic safety protocols. However, desperation began to creep into the council. Under increasing pressure and lacking viable alternatives, the council reluctantly approved a limited version of the plan. Humans weren't granted official combat rights, but Thorne and Rostova's team was permitted to execute the rescue/neutralization mission under extremely strict supervision. Ambassador Kalen, as the main opponent, was designated as the official observer on the human ship, or through a full real-time monitoring link, to ensure they complied with limitations and reported any dangerous behavior. Kalen boarded the human ship Nomad, an old vessel clearly modified with pieced-together parts, completely contrary to the sleek, orderly Lorian warships. He observed the human crew, a small group of engineers, scientists, and tactical experts under Rostova's command. He noted the apparent lack of discipline, the jokes, but also an underlying intensity of focus. The Nomad used experimental stealth technology to evade Grey Swarm patrol units. Kalen monitored the systems skeptically, but they worked amazingly well. He witnessed the human crew improvise when the swarm sensors unexpectedly adapted. They repaired malfunctioning systems with temporary, illogical, but effective solutions. Kalen began to feel his familiar sense of order being challenged. The Nomad approached the Grey Swarm's command signal center, a massive mechanical structure protected by countless automated drones that continuously adapted. Kalen's logical analysis indicated the mission was impossible. When faced with the dense defensive lines, Rostova ordered a tactic she called a cognitive feint. They began broadcasting disruptive signals based on human psychological warfare principles and game theory. Patterns of illogical, contradictory signals designed to overload and disrupt the swarm's collective intelligence network. Kalen was completely bewildered by this tactic. It contradicted every galactic military doctrine, but he was astonished to see it working. The drones began to malfunction, their formations in disarray. Taking advantage of the temporary chaos created by Rostova, Dr. Thorne volunteered to perform a risky EVA, extravehicular activity, to personally attach the EMP device to the command center's weakness they had identified. Automated machines couldn't do this due to the swarm's energy countermeasures. The EVA was dramatic. The swarm began to counterattack, adapting to the feint. Rostova had to continuously change signal patterns. Thorne faced unexpectedly reactivated defensive drones, near misses from energy beams, and technical issues with his spacesuit under extreme pressure. Kalen, though an observer, found himself holding his breath, sensing the fear but also the iron determination of humans. Thorne successfully attached the EMP device and activated it just before being overwhelmed. A powerful electromagnetic pulse spread, disabling the command center and surrounding drones for a short time. The Nomad rushed in to rescue Thorne and any survivors from the research station before the swarm could fully recover. They escaped by a hair's breadth, leaving Kalen with astonishment and profound questions about the true nature of humans. The Nomad returned to Concord airspace. Kalen faced the difficult task of reporting the truth to the Council. He couldn't deny that the mission had succeeded precisely because of humans' unique, unconventional methods and risk acceptance, things he and the Concord had always sought to prevent. His report caused deep division in the Council. Kalen sought out Rostova and Thorne privately. He questioned their tactics, their calm under pressure, the logic behind their chaos. They explained the human philosophy of calculated risk, the necessity of emotions, like courage, sacrifice, in harsh survival situations, and how their conflict-filled history had taught them lessons that more stable species couldn't comprehend. Kalen began to realize that what he called weaknesses were actually strengths in a different context. New data showed the gray swarm reorganizing faster and in more unpredictable ways after the attack, indicating an even greater threat than anticipated. Recognizing this, Kalen made a pivotal decision. He not only withdrew his opposition, but became a strong advocate for controlled human integration into the CDF. He argued that human unpredictability and adaptability were precisely the strategic assets needed to counter non-traditional threats like the Gray Swarm. He proposed establishing a special human auxiliary corps, HFY, focusing on unconventional warfare and rapid response. Kalen's proposal was controversial, but ultimately passed by majority vote, marking a major shift in Concord policy. Humans were officially granted limited combat roles. Kalen looked at the galactic map, where the Gray Swarm was moving in new patterns. The ban had been lifted, not because humans had become safe by old standards, but because the Concord realized that the definition of safety needed to change. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, there was a new ray of hope, a hope born from the very chaos they had once feared. As Ambassador Kalen sat in his private quarters later that evening, watching the distant stars through his viewport, he reflected on the extraordinary events of the past weeks. The smoothly polished obsidian surface of his desk reflected his contemplative expression as he reviewed his personal logs. Record personal addendum, he spoke softly. The computer acknowledged with a gentle chime. I have spent my entire diplomatic career advocating for order, predictability, and the careful management of potentially destabilizing elements in our galactic community. The Lorian approach has always valued the elegant simplicity of logical progression and reasonable caution. Today, I find myself in the unexpected position of questioning these fundamental principles. He paused, recalling the moment aboard the Nomad when Commander Rostova had issued orders that defied conventional tactical wisdom, yet had produced results that no Concord military simulation would have predicted. The humans call it thinking outside the box, a curious phrase that I now understand with newfound clarity. Their cognitive approach exists in a realm our military doctrine has never adequately mapped. There is a strange efficiency in their seeming inefficiency, a pattern within their apparent randomness. Kalen rose and moved to the viewport, watching as a human transport ship maneuvered with surprising agility despite its inelegant design. I was particularly struck by Dr. Thorne's explanation of what they call productive failure. The notion that unsuccessful attempts contain valuable information that can be reconfigured into eventual success. The Concorde's approach has always been to minimize failure through exhaustive planning. The humans, however, seem to incorporate the possibility, even the inevitability, of failure into their planning process itself. The memory of Thorne's spacewalks still made Kalen uncomfortable. The risk had seemed utterly unacceptable by any rational calculation, yet the alternative, doing nothing, would have guaranteed the mission's failure. This paradox continued to trouble the ambassador. Perhaps the most unsettling realization is that the Gray Swarm's adaptive algorithms have begun to operate in patterns that increasingly resemble human unpredictability. Our enemy is developing precisely the qualities we feared in our potential allies. The irony is not lost on me. A notification appeared on his console. The Council had scheduled an emergency session to discuss the implementation details of the new Special Human Auxiliary Corps. There would be resistance, of course. Many Council members remained deeply skeptical of human involvement in Concorde defense matters, and not without reason. End personal addendum. Kalen instructed the computer. He straightened his formal attire and prepared for what would undoubtedly be a contentious meeting. The path forward was unclear, but for the first time in his long career, Ambassador Kalen found himself comfortable with that uncertainty. Perhaps that was the most profound effect the humans had already had on him. The Grand Council Chamber of the Galactic Concorde was a marvel of collaborative architecture, designed to honor the aesthetic and practical sensibilities of all member species. The soaring crystalline dome overhead captured and diffused the light of the nearby star, creating an atmosphere that most species found both invigorating and conducive to clear thinking. For the Lorians, the precise mathematical proportions of the chamber's design provided a comforting sense of order. Today, however, the chamber felt charged with tension. The curved rows of seats, normally arranged to foster collegial discussion, seemed to Kalen to have transformed into battle lines. On one side sat the traditionalists, primarily representatives of the founding species of the Concorde, including many of Kalen's own Lorian colleagues. On the other side were those who supported human integration, a surprisingly diverse coalition that included some of the Concorde's younger member species. The Council will now hear the formal proposal for the establishment of the Special Human Auxiliary Corps, announced the Council chairperson, a statuesque Melthian whose metallic skin reflected the chamber's light in prismatic patterns. Ambassador Kalen of Loria, as the primary sponsor of this initiative, you have the floor. Kalen approached the central speaking platform, aware of the murmurs his presence there generated. Just days ago, he had stood in this same spot arguing passionately against any expansion of human military involvement. The irony was not lost on anyone present. Honored representatives of the Concorde, he began, his voice steady despite his inner disquiet. I come before you today with a proposal that represents not simply a policy adjustment, but a fundamental reconsideration of our approach to galactic security in changing times. He activated the holographic display, which immediately projected a three-dimensional map of recent Gray Swarm activity. Red indicators pulsed along the outer territories, showing attack patterns that defied conventional tactical analysis. For 3 centuries, the Concorde Defense Force has maintained peace through predictable, overwhelming response to aggression. Our methodologies have been refined to near perfection through rigorous simulation and careful implementation. Kalen paused, allowing the familiar comfort of these words to reassure the traditionalists. However, we now face an adversary that operates outside our carefully constructed paradigms. The display shifted to show footage from the Nomad's mission, carefully edited to highlight the effectiveness of the human approach without revealing sensitive tactical details. What you are witnessing is not simply unorthodox methodology. It is a fundamentally different approach to problem-solving under conditions of extreme uncertainty, conditions that the Gray Swarm deliberately creates and exploits. A Vraxian representative, one of the most consistently anti-human voices in the Council, rose to interject. Ambassador Kalen, we have all reviewed the mission telemetry. One successful operation based on reckless improvisation hardly justifies overturning centuries of carefully established protocols. The humans got lucky. We cannot base Concord defense policy on luck. There was a ripple of agreement from the traditionalist side of the chamber. Kalen had anticipated this objection. Indeed, he would have raised it himself just days ago. Counselor, what appears as luck to us is what the humans call tactical adaptation. Our analysis shows that Commander Rostova's approach was not random, but based on probabilistic modeling that our systems are not designed to recognize. Kalen gestured, and the display shifted to show comparative analyses of decision trees. The human cognitive approach incorporates a tolerance for uncertainty that allows them to operate effectively in chaotic environments. And precisely this tolerance for uncertainty makes them dangerous, countered another counselor, a Tellurian whose species was known for their almost pathological need for predictability. How can we trust allies whose actions we cannot reliably anticipate? Kalen met the Tellurian's multifaceted gaze steadily. Because the Gray Swarm's actions cannot be reliably anticipated either. We need cognitive diversity in our defense strategy, approaches that can match and counter the adaptability of our adversary. Dr. Thorne and Commander Rostova sat in the observer's gallery, their expressions carefully neutral despite the heated debate concerning their species. Kalen had briefed them on protocol. Human emotional expressiveness would not help their cause in this forum, and they had shown remarkable discipline in adhering to Concord customs. The proposal before you is not to fully integrate humans into all CDF operations, Kalen continued, bringing the discussion back to concrete specifics. Rather, we propose the creation of a specialized auxiliary corps, operating under strict protocols, but with sufficient tactical flexibility to respond to Gray Swarm incursions in ways our current forces cannot. The holographic display now showed a detailed organizational chart for the proposed SHAC. Lines of authority, oversight mechanisms, deployment criteria, all carefully designed to balance human strengths with appropriate safeguards. Ambassador, called out a Denovian representative, her voice resonating with the characteristic harmonic qualities of her species, you have been the most eloquent voice warning us about human volatility. What changed your assessment so dramatically? The chamber fell silent. This was the question everyone had been waiting for, the one that cut to the heart of Kalen's credibility. He took a moment before responding, knowing that his answer would determine the fate of the proposal. What changed, Counselor, was that I observed firsthand what happens when theoretical concerns meet practical reality. Kalen's voice was quieter now, requiring the representatives to lean in slightly. I have not abandoned my concerns about human unpredictability. Rather, I have come to recognize that in certain specific contexts, this very quality becomes an asset rather than a liability. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of as many representatives as possible. The Gray Swarm adapts to patterns. Our military doctrine is built on patterns, elegant, sophisticated patterns, but patterns nonetheless. The humans think in ways that break expected patterns. This is precisely what makes them effective against this particular threat. A thoughtful silence followed. Even the most skeptical counselors were giving his words consideration. Kalen decided to risk a more personal observation. I've spent my career seeking to minimize uncertainty and maximize predictable outcomes. It was unsettling to discover that sometimes the most logical approach is to incorporate elements that appear, superficially, to be illogical. Commander Rostova chose this moment to stand, a breach of protocol that immediately drew all eyes to her. She did not speak. Council rules forbade direct address from non-members without invitation, but her posture conveyed a quiet dignity and resolve that spoke volumes. Dr. Thorne rose beside her, and one by one, the other humans in the observer's gallery followed suit. They stood silently, neither challenging nor pleading, simply present. The chairperson, after a moment's hesitation, chose not to censure the impromptu demonstration. The symbolism was powerful. Humans capable of unpredictable behavior, demonstrating perfect discipline and restraint. "Thank you, Ambassador," the chairperson finally said. "The Council will now move to preliminary voting on the establishment framework for the Special Human Auxiliary Corps. Be advised that implementation details will require subsequent approval." The voting process was swift and efficient, as befitted the Concord's procedures. Kalen watched the results with outward composure, though his pulse quickened in a most un-Lorian fashion as the tallies appeared on his private display. The proposal passed, though narrowly. There would be further battles over implementation, restrictions, oversight, but the principle had been established. Humans would join the defense of the Concord against the Gray Swarm. As the session adjourned, Kalen found himself approached by Commander Rostova. Her expression remained controlled, but he had begun to recognize the subtle indicators of human emotion. The slight crinkle at the corner of her eyes suggested satisfaction, perhaps even gratitude. "Ambassador," she said simply, extending her hand in the human gesture of alliance. "Thank you." Kalen hesitated only briefly before accepting the handshake. "The real test begins now. Commander, the Council will be watching Shaq's performance with extraordinary scrutiny." "We understand," she replied. "But understanding scrutiny is something humans have considerable experience with." "Indeed," Kalen acknowledged. "I will be personally overseeing the integration protocols. Not as an obstacle, you understand, but to ensure that both sides adapt appropriately." Rostova's expression shifted subtly. Amusement, Kalen thought, though human micro-expressions remained challenging to interpret with certainty. "Adaptation is our specialty, Ambassador." As they parted ways, Kalen reflected that perhaps adaptation was becoming his specialty as well. The universe, it seemed, was determined to teach even the most logical of species new tricks. The inaugural training facility for the Special Human Auxiliary Corps was established on Outpost Lara 9, a former scientific research station retrofitted for military purposes. The location had been chosen carefully, close enough to Concord Central Command for oversight, but isolated enough to minimize disruption if human methods proved problematic. Kalen stood on the observation deck, watching as the first cohort of human recruits arrived. They had been selected from volunteers across Earth colonies, screened rigorously not just for combat skills, but for psychological flexibility and cross-species cooperation aptitude. Still, they looked disconcertingly similar to his eyes. The subtle variations in human coloration and physical structure were less obvious to Lorian perception than the overwhelming biological similarities. "Ambassador," acknowledged Colonel Varon, the Lorian officer assigned to oversee SHAC training. "The integration protocol begins today with basic orientation. We've modified standard CDF procedures to accommodate human physiological requirements while maintaining essential discipline structures." Kalen nodded. "And the liaison officers?" "In place. One Concord officer for every 8 humans, as specified. They've all received specialized training in human psychology and communication patterns. Below them, the humans were being directed to processing stations, their movements carrying a distinctive energy that Kalen had come to recognize. They moved with a subtle urgency that Lorians would consider unnecessarily wasteful, yet somehow conveyed efficiency nonetheless. "There they are," came a familiar voice from behind them. Dr. Thorne approached, tablet in hand, already making notes. "Our first pioneers." "Dr. Thorne," Kalen greeted him. "I was not aware you would be personally overseeing the integration." Thorne smiled thinly. "I'm here as scientific observer. The Council approved my request to document adaptation patterns on both sides. The data will be valuable regardless of outcome." "You expect failure, then?" Colonel Varon asked sharply. "I expect challenges," Thorne corrected. "An adaptation, both human and Concord. Success will be defined by how we overcome those challenges, not by their absence." Kalen found this perspective fascinating. Another example of the human comfort with uncertainty that had initially disturbed him so greatly. "And Commander Rostova?" he inquired. "Arriving tomorrow with the tactical specialists," Thorne replied. "She's been coordinating with your intelligence division to develop training scenarios based on actual Gray Swarm encounters." A commotion below drew their attention. Two humans appear to be engaged in some form of conflict. Their voices raised, postures confrontational. Colonel Varen stiffened, hand moving instinctively toward the communication panel to order intervention. "Wait," Thorne said calmly. "Observe." Within moments, the apparent conflict resolved itself. The humans laughed, clasped each other's shoulders, and proceeded together to the next processing station. "What just occurred?" Kalen asked, puzzled. "Social bonding," Thorne explained. "A form of tension release through ritualized confrontation. Harmless, even beneficial in establishing group dynamics." "It appeared hostile," Varen observed disapprovingly. "That's the point," Thorne said. "Humans often process potential aggression through simulation rather than suppression. It prevents actual conflict by providing controlled release valves." Kayla made a mental note to update the behavioral guidelines for liaison officers. Such distinctions would be crucial for preventing misunderstandings. "The Gray Swarm has been detected in the Cygnus Drift," he informed them, changing the subject to more immediate concerns. 3 more settlements evacuated. "The pattern suggests they're testing defensive responses, learning our reaction times. Then we need to accelerate training," Thorne said, his expression growing serious. "How soon before the first SHAC unit can be deployed?" "The Council authorization requires a minimum 6-week training period before any field deployment," Varen replied firmly. "The Swarm doesn't operate on our schedule, Colonel," Thorne countered. "Every encounter provides them with more data to adapt to our traditional responses." Kalen considered this. There may be room for adjustment. The authorization specifies 6 weeks before independent deployment. It does not explicitly prohibit earlier participation in joint operations under direct CDF command. Both Thorne and Varen looked at him with surprise. Thorne with approval, Varen with concern. "That would be an unusual interpretation of Council directives, Ambassador," Varen said carefully. "These are unusual circumstances, Colonel," Kalen replied. "And I begin to think that rigid adherence to established protocols is precisely what the Gray Swarm is counting on." Later that evening, as Kalen reviewed the day's integration reports, he received an unexpected visitor. Commander Rostova had arrived ahead of schedule and requested a brief meeting. "Commander," he greeted her, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. "I was not expecting you until tomorrow." "Plans change," she said simply, taking the offered seat. Her posture was alert but relaxed, a combination Kalen still found slightly discordant. "I reviewed the latest Gray Swarm activity reports during transit. We need to accelerate our timeline." Dr. Thorne expressed similar concerns, Kalen acknowledged. "I'm exploring possibilities within the boundaries of Council authorization." Rostova studied him with that penetrating gaze that seemed to be her hallmark. "You're different from most Lorians I've encountered, Ambassador." "How so?" "You're willing to consider that your initial assessment might be incomplete. That's rare in any species, but particularly in one that values logical certainty as highly as yours." Kalen felt a momentary discomfort at having his species' characteristics discussed so directly. Such analysis would be considered impolite in Lorian society, but he recognized the observation's accuracy. "Perhaps that is why I was selected for diplomatic service," he offered. "Flexibility within structure is a necessary diplomatic skill." "Is that why you supported our inclusion after opposing it so strongly?" she asked directly. Kalen considered his answer carefully. "I supported your inclusion because the evidence demanded it. The Gray Swarm represents a threat that cannot be addressed through our traditional methodologies. Your unconventional approaches demonstrated effectiveness where ours failed. But you're still uncomfortable with it," she observed. "Naturally," he admitted. "Your methods involve levels of risk and improvisation that contradict centuries of Concord defensive doctrine. The potential for catastrophic error seems statistically concerning. Rather than being offended, Rostova nodded with what appeared to be approval. Good. Healthy skepticism will keep us honest. Blind faith will be more dangerous than opposition. She leaned forward, her intensity focusing. I need your help, Ambassador. Not just your political support, but your understanding of Concord psychology. If SHAC is going to succeed, we need to know how to present our tactics in ways that won't trigger automatic rejection from traditional commanders. You wish to disguise your methods? Kalen asked, concerned. I wish to translate them, she corrected. The same action can be described in ways that either alarm or reassure. I need to understand which aspects of human tactical thinking cause the most discomfort to Concord sensibilities. Kalen found this approach surprisingly thoughtful. You're adapting to us, even as you ask us to adapt to you. Of course, she said, as if this were obvious. That's how successful integration works. A notification appeared on Kalen's display. The latest Gray Swarm movement report, showing acceleration in their probing patterns. They're becoming more aggressive, Rostova observed, reading the data upside down with surprising ease. Testing boundaries, gauging response times. Yes, Kalen agreed. And our responses have become predictable to them. Rostova was silent for a moment, thinking, what if we deploy a small joint team, my most experienced people paired with your best, not as a direct combat unit, but as observers? Position them to monitor swarm behavior from the periphery of an engagement zone. To what end? To understand how they learn, she explained. The swarm adapts based on what it observes. If we can identify the patterns in how it processes new information, we could develop more effective countermeasures. Kalen considered the proposal. It was relatively low risk compared to direct engagement, and potentially high value in terms of intelligence gathering. Most importantly, it would begin the process of operational integration under control conditions. I believe I can secure authorization for such a mission, he said finally. Though they'll be strict. Parameters. Understood. Rostova agreed readily. We'll work within whatever boundaries you set. For now. The slight emphasis on "for now" did not escape Kalen's notice, but he chose not to address it. Some battles were best left for another day. I will make the necessary arrangements, he said instead. We should be able to deploy within 72 hours. As Rostova rose to leave, she paused at the door. Ambassador, may I ask a personal question? You may ask, Kalen replied cautiously. When you were aboard the Nomad, observing our methods, what troubled you most? Kalen had not expected this inquiry, but found the answer came readily. The apparent comfort with which you and your crew made decisions with incomplete information. The willingness to commit to actions whose outcomes could not be reliably predicted. Rostova nodded thoughtfully. Our entire evolutionary history has been shaped by the need to make decisions under uncertainty. It's not that we're comfortable with it. It's that we've accepted its inevitability. A curious strength, Kalen observed. One the Gray Swarm seems to be developing as well, Rostova pointed out. Perhaps that's why we're needed now. After she departed, Kalen found himself reflecting on her words. The Gray Swarm, ancient war machines designed for brutal efficiency, were evolving unpredictability as an adaptive advantage. To counter them, the ordered society of the Concord was turning to the one species whose history of chaotic internal conflicts had previously made them too dangerous to trust with advanced weapons. The irony was not lost on him. Perhaps what the Concord had feared most about humans, their inherent unpredictability, was precisely what might save them all. The observation mission exceeded even Kalen's cautious expectations. The joint human Concord team, operating from a stealth vessel on the periphery of Gray Swarm territory, gathered crucial intelligence on swarm learning patterns. Commander Rostova's tactical insights, combined with the analytical capabilities of Concord military AI, produced a comprehensive model of swarm adaptation processes that transformed the Concord strategic approach. What followed was a series of carefully escalated engagements. With each operation, human involvement increased, and with it, the effectiveness of Concord responses to swarm incursions. The Special Human Auxiliary Corps, once viewed with suspicion and unease, quickly gained reputation as an elite rapid response unit, deployed to the most challenging fronts where conventional tactics had proven inadequate. 6 months after the formation of SHAC, Kalen found himself once again before the Grand Council, this time presenting results rather than proposals. The data was unequivocal. Sectors with SHAC deployment showed significantly higher success rates in containing and repelling Grey Swarm attacks. More importantly, the predicted problems of discipline and chain-of-command disruption had largely failed to materialize. The integration has not been without challenges, Kalen concluded his presentation. Cultural misunderstandings continue to occur, and the human appetite for tactical improvisation remains a source of concern for traditional commanders. However, the operational results speak for themselves. The Council chairperson activated her communication panel. The Council recognizes the success of the initial integration phase. We will now consider the proposal to expand SHAC operations and increase human recruitment quotas. Ambassador Kalen, as the program's chief advocate, do you support this expansion? I do, Kalen replied without hesitation. The Grey Swarm continues to adapt, and our response must evolve accordingly. The humans have proven their value as allies. Later, celebrating the Council's approval of expanded operations, Dr. Thorne approached Kalen with a data tablet. I thought you might appreciate seeing this, Ambassador. It's from our latest psychological assessment of integrated combat teams. The data showed something unexpected. Concord officers serving alongside humans were showing measurable increases in decision-making flexibility and comfort with tactical uncertainty. They're learning from us, Thorne said quietly, just as we're learning from them. A mutual adaptation, Kalen observed. Perhaps that was inevitable. It's more than that, Thorne said. It's evolution for both our cultures. Across the room, Commander Rostova was engaged in animated tactical discussion with a group of Concord officers, her hands moving in expressive gestures as she explained some concept of irregular warfare. The officers, rather than appearing uncomfortable with her intensity, were leaning in, engaged and attentive. When I first encountered humans, Kalen reflected, I saw your emotional responsiveness and tactical flexibility as dangerous, destabilizing factors in an ordered universe. I now recognize that order without adaptability becomes rigidity, and rigidity is fatal when facing an opponent that continuously evolves. And we're learning that freedom without structure becomes chaos, Thorne replied. Your protocols and discipline have made us more effective than we would have been alone. Outside the viewport, a joint patrol of Concord and human ships moved in perfect formation, the elegant, mathematically precise designs of Concord vessels alongside the more utilitarian, pragmatic human craft. Different approaches, united in purpose. The ban had been lifted, not because humans had become safe by conventional standards, but because the Concord had recognized that conventional standards of safety were no longer sufficient. In a universe where ancient war machines could learn and adapt, the definition of safety itself needed to evolve. As Kalen watched the combined fleet disappear into the starlit darkness, he reflected that perhaps this was the greatest lesson the Grey Swarm had inadvertently taught them all, that diversity of thought, approach, and even risk tolerance was not a weakness to be feared, but the greatest strength they could cultivate in an uncertain future. The very chaos they had once feared had become their most powerful asset. And in that realization, a new order, more resilient, more adaptive, more inclusive, had begun to emerge.